I have 5 children. I have 10 grandchildren. But on New Year's Eve, the only thing holding my hand was a heating pad. And the only voice I heard was the weatherman on the television telling me it was going to be a cold night. They say you can't die of a broken heart. But as I sat there in my recliner, watching the clock tick toward midnight, I swear I could feel the cracks forming in my chest. It was 8:00 p.m. when the doubt first started creeping in. Just creeping, mind you. I wasn't ready to admit the truth yet. I had been sitting in that chair since noon, fighting off a fever that made my head feel like it was stuffed with cotton. My hip, the bad one that's been giving me grief since '98, was throbbing with a dull, hot ache. I was wrapped in my old Afghan, the one with the frayed edges, shivering despite the heat being cranked up to 74. The house was so quiet. And that's the thing about a big house. When it's full of people, it feels like a home. But when you're sick and you're old and you're alone on a holiday, it feels like a tomb. I kept my eyes glued to the phone sitting on the side table. It was fully charged. The ringer was on high. I had wiped the screen with my sleeve 3 times just to make sure I wasn't missing a notification light. Nothing, just a black screen reflecting my own tired face back at me. I looked up at the television. It was the only source of light in the room. On the screen, thousands of people were packed into Times Square. They were freezing, but they were smiling. They were hugging strangers, screaming, blowing those little noisemakers. You could feel the electricity of it, the togetherness. Then I looked around my living room. Shadows stretched across the carpet. The kitchen was dark. There was no smell of roasting turkey, no scent of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. Just the smell of Vicks Vapo Rub and old dust. I reached for my mug of tea, my hand trembling just a little, whether from the fever or the nerves. I couldn't tell. I took a sip, but it had gone stone cold. "They're just busy," I whispered to the empty room. "Traffic is probably a nightmare." That's the first lie I told myself that night, and I held onto it tight. I picked up the phone again. 8:35 p.m. I opened the family group chat. The last message was from me. "Hi everyone, just letting you know Mom has caught a nasty bug. Doctor says it's the flu. I'm staying in bed. Love you all." That message was sent Tuesday morning at 9:00 a.m. It was now Friday night, 3 days, 72 hours of silence. Underneath my message, a thumbs up from Michael, a heart reaction from Sarah, and nothing from the other 3, not a peep. I stared at that little thumbs up icon. It looked so small, so dismissive. It takes 1 second to tap a screen, 1 second to acknowledge that your mother is sick. But 3 days later, no one had called to hear my voice. No one had asked if I had groceries. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I wanted to type something. I wanted to scream in all capital letters, "I am sick and I am lonely and I am your mother." But I didn't. I put the phone back down. Because I'm stubborn, and because I refused to believe that this was it. "No," I said, shifting my weight and wincing as my hip popped. "They're planning a surprise. That's what it is. They're being quiet because they're all going to walk through that door together yelling, 'Surprise,' any minute now." I looked across the room at the Wall of Fame. That's what my late husband used to call it. It's the wall where we hung all the accomplishments of the 5 lives we created. There's David's doctorate degree, framed in mahogany. There's Sarah S. Lawyer of the Year plaque. There are the wedding photos of the twins, smiling so big their eyes are squinted shut. There's Michael, my baby, holding his firstborn son. I looked at Michael's smile in that picture. That warm, goofy smile. That is not the face of a son who forgets his mother, I told myself, feeling a lump in my throat. He's a good boy. He's probably just stuck at the in-laws. He's probably watching the clock right now, waiting to leave so he can come check on me. And Sarah, she's organized. She never forgets a date. If she isn't here, it's because something big happened. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe the kids got sick too. I started making up a list of excuses in my head, building a fortress out of them. I defended them to the empty room. They wouldn't just leave me here, I muttered, my voice sounding thin and weak in the large room. Not after everything I've done. Not after 40 years of being the one who made this night magic. I refused to accept the silence. I refused to accept that the phone wasn't ringing. I closed my eyes tight, squeezing them shut until I saw stars. I wasn't trying to sleep. I was trying to summon them. I told myself that if I just concentrated hard enough, if I just remembered how it used to be, I could make it happen again. I could make the noise. Come back. I could force the universe to bring my family back to me. I am the glue, I thought, my heart hammering against my ribs. I have always been the glue. They can't celebrate without me. They just can't. So I dug my heels in. I didn't look at the dark driveway. Instead, I let my mind race back to the past, looking for the proof I so desperately needed. Proof that I mattered. Proof that this silence was just a mistake and not the end of my life as I knew it. I closed my eyes, and just like that, the silence of the empty house shattered. In my mind, it wasn't 2024 anymore. It was 1995, or maybe 2005. The years sort of blur together when you've been doing the same thing for 4 decades, but the feeling, the feeling was always the same. In my memory, the air didn't smell like Vicks Vapo Rub. It smelled like yeast rolls rising on top of the warm stove. It smelled like a 20-pound ham glazing in the oven with brown sugar and pineapple rings. It smelled like pine needles from the Christmas tree we hadn't taken down yet, and the sharp, clean scent of the cold air every time the front door swung open. And the door always swung open. For 40 years, my house wasn't just a house on New Year's Eve. It was Grand Central Station. It was the only place to be. I let myself see it. I let myself see David when he was 22, walking through that door with a bag of ice on his shoulder, his cheeks rosy from the wind, shouting, "Mom, where do you want the sodas?" That was David before the PhD. That was David before the country club membership and the fancy address. That was back when he was just my boy, before the world and his wife told him he was too important to carry a bag of ice. I saw Sarah before she was a Lawyer of the Year, sitting on the kitchen counter stealing tastes of the macaroni and cheese, slapping her hand away and laughing. I saw the grandkids, Lord, the noise they made. It was a beautiful racket. Running up and down the stairs, playing hide-and-seek under the dining room table, the dog barking his head off because he was so excited to see everyone. I sat there in my cold recliner, but in my head I was sweating. That's what people don't tell you about being the matriarch, about being the heart of the family. It's hard work. It is physical labor. For 40 years, I didn't sit down on New Year's Eve until the ball dropped. I was a general in an apron. I was the one who made sure the air mattresses were blown up and covered with fresh sheets for the ones who were staying over. I was the one who remembered that Michael didn't like onions in his potato salad and that Emily was allergic to walnuts. I was the one who made sure there was sparkling cider for the babies and champagne for the adults. I was the glue. People love to use that word, don't they? Oh, Mom, you're the glue that holds this family together. They say it like a compliment, and for a long time I took it as one. I wore it like a badge of honor. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something about glue. Glue is sticky. Glue is messy. And most importantly, glue is invisible. You don't notice the glue when the vase is whole. You only notice it when the glue stops holding and everything shatters on the floor. I remembered the sheer, logistical miracle of those nights. I'd start cooking 3 days in advance. My feet would swell up so bad I'd have to wear my husband's slippers, but I didn't care. Because when that clock hit 11:59 p.m. and I looked around my living room, every single corner was filled. I remember one year specifically. It must have been 10 years ago. I was just starting to feel the arthritis in my hands. I had dropped a heavy platter of deviled eggs earlier in the day and cried in the pantry for 5 minutes out of frustration. David had found me wiping my eyes. He hugged me and said, "Mom, why do you do all this? It's too much." And I wiped my hands on my apron, looked him in the eye, and said, "Because if I don't do it, who will? This is us, David. This is who we are. We are the family that shows up." I thought I was building something permanent. I really did. I thought that by making my home the fun place, the warm place, I was installing a homing beacon in their hearts. I thought that no matter how old they got, no matter how far they moved, the gravitational pull of Mom's house on New Year's Eve would always be stronger than anything else. But then the shift happened. It wasn't sudden. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet erosion. First, it was the hip surgery. That was 4 years ago. The doctor told me, "Helen, you cannot be standing for 8 hours a day cooking for an army. You need to rest." So that year, I sent the text, "Kids, I can't do the big party this year. I'm just not up to the cooking and the cleaning. Maybe we can do something small, or maybe one of you wants to host." I remember waiting for the reply. I honestly thought naively, stupidly, that they'd I'd say, "Don't worry, Mom. We're bringing the party to you. We'll bring the food, we'll do the dishes. You just sit in your chair and be the queen." That's what I would have done for my mother. But that's not what happened. Instead, my phone lit up with a message from my daughter-in-law, sent through the group chat. "Since you aren't cooking, we're actually going to go to Brenda's parents' house this year. Her mom is doing a prime rib roast and having everyone over. We'll catch you next time." I stared at that text for a long time. Her mom is doing a prime rib. It felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just that they weren't coming, it was that they were trading up. They went where the food was better. They went where the service was still running. It started with a trickle, one kid missing, then two. And then this year, the memory in my head started to fade. The smell of the yeast rolls evaporated, replaced suddenly by the smell of hot plastic. My heating pad had automatically shut off. The cold rushed back into my body instantly. I opened my eyes. The living room was exactly as I had left it, empty, dark, still. The wall of fame stared back at me. Those smiling faces in the frames mocked me. They were frozen in time, back when they needed me. Back when I was the source of their food, their comfort, their holiday magic. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had peeled thousands of potatoes. They looked old. They looked useless. That's the hard pill to swallow, isn't it? I realized that I wasn't their mother. I was the caterer. I was the venue. And you don't visit the caterer when the restaurant is closed. As long as I was providing the venue, the labor, and the comfort, they were here. But the moment I became a person who needed something, instead of a person who gave something, the room cleared out. But no, I shook my head, shifting in the chair again, trying to restart the heating pad with shaking fingers. I couldn't let myself think like that. That's a bitter way to think. They aren't using me, I whispered, my voice sounding desperate even to my own ears. That's not fair, Helen. They're just planning something. I glanced at the window. It was pitch black outside now. The reflection in the glass showed an old woman in a recliner, looking small and scared. I reached for the phone again, my heart doing a little anxious flutter. It was 6:45 p.m. I told myself the silence didn't mean they didn't care. It just meant they were planning a surprise. Maybe that's why no one texted back. They were on their way. They were probably parking the cars down the street right now so they could sneak up to the door. I unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over the Messages app, ready to see the on our way message I must have missed. I stared at that phone screen until my eyes burned, waiting for a message that wasn't there. It was just past 7:00 p.m. But the game I was playing with myself, the mental gymnastics, that had started hours ago. To be honest, I had been driving myself crazy since the sun went down. But by 7:00 p.m., the denial had kicked into high gear. That's when the logic started. You know how we do it. When the truth is too painful to look at directly, we start building little walls of logic to block it out. We become defense attorneys for people who haven't even been charged with a crime yet. I sat there in the dark, feverish and achy, and I started constructing the timeline of their surprise. Okay, Helen, I whispered, trying to sound reasonable. Think about it. David gets off work at 5. Sarah has to pick up the kids from daycare. By the time they load up the car, get on the highway, and deal with the holiday traffic, they wouldn't be here yet. I nodded to myself. It made sense. And they aren't calling, I reasoned, because they are driving. You don't text and drive. I raised them better than that. They are being responsible. It was a flimsy raft, but I clung to it like a drowning woman. But then 7:30 p.m. rolled around. The silence in the house started to feel less like a pause and more like a sentence. The doubt started to gnaw at me again, like a mouse in the walls. I needed proof. I needed just a tiny crumb of information to keep my hope alive without ruining the surprise I had invented in my head. So I decided to go fishing. I couldn't text my kids directly. If they were truly planning a surprise, asking, "Where are you?" would ruin the moment. And if they weren't coming, well, asking that question would just force them to reject me to my face, and I wasn't ready for that kind of hurt yet. So I did what any mother who doesn't want to be a burden does. I triangulated. I pulled up the contact for my daughter-in-law, Jessica, David's wife. Now, Jessica and I have always been polite. We aren't close, not like I wanted to be, but we send Christmas cards. She's the gatekeeper to my son's schedule. If anyone knew where David was, it was her. I typed out a message. I was careful with the wording. I didn't want to sound desperate. I didn't want to sound like a lonely old woman begging for scraps. Happy New Year, Jessica. Hope the boys are enjoying the holiday. Just wanted to make sure you guys are staying warm tonight. Casual, breezy. Not a demand, just a friendly wave. I hit send. Then came the torture of modern technology. The 3 dots. I watched those little gray bubbles dance on the screen. Bounce, Bounce, bounce. I held my breath, watching those dots. I didn't realize I was suffocating myself until my lungs burned. She was typing. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. She was going to say, "We're 10 minutes away, Mom. Put the kettle on." I sat up straight, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my hip. I fixed my hair, smoothing down the gray wisps that had come loose. I wanted to look presentable when they walked in. The bubbles stopped. Then nothing. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then a new notification popped up. Not a text message, a reaction. Jessica had loved my message. A little heart icon attached to my text. That was it. No words. No, we're coming. No, see you soon. Just a digital heart. I stared at it, confused. What does a heart mean? Does it mean love you, see you soon? Or does it mean I read this, I acknowledge you exist, now please leave me alone so I can enjoy my party? It felt like a door being gently closed in my face. But I wouldn't let it go. I couldn't. She's busy, I told myself, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. She's probably in the car, helping David navigate. She saw the text and gave a quick heart just to let me know they're okay. She can't type a full paragraph right now. I was grasping at straws, and I knew it. But the alternative was accepting that my son and his wife were sitting somewhere comfortable, looking at their phones, seeing my name, and choosing not to engage. So I tried again. I texted Sarah's husband, Mark. Mark is a good guy. He likes my apple pie. He wouldn't ignore me. Happy New Year, Mark. Drive safe out there tonight. The roads look icy on the news. Sent 7:45 p.m. I watched the screen. Read 7:46 p.m. He saw it, he opened it. I waited for the reply. I waited for the reassurance. 7:50 p.m. Nothing. 7:55 p.m. Still nothing. He had left me on read. That little word, read, cut deeper than any insult could have. It meant I was seen, and I was dismissed. It meant he looked at my words, processed them, and decided that typing, "Thanks, Helen, you too," was too much effort for his New Year's Eve. Or maybe, the voice of denial whispered in my ear. Maybe he showed the phone to Sarah, and she slapped his arm and said, "Don't reply. We're almost there. Don't spoil the surprise." Yes, that had to be it. They were coordinating. They were in cahoots. The silence wasn't negligence, it was strategy. The sun had gone down completely now. The living room was submerged in shadow, the corners of the room disappearing into the gloom. The only light came from the TV screen, casting flickering blue light over my hands. I felt small. I felt like a child waiting to be picked up from school long after all the other buses had left. And then my body betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. A loud, grumbling growl echoed through the silent room. My stomach. I hadn't eaten since lunch, a piece of dry toast and some tea around noon. I had been so consumed with waiting, so full of anxious hope, that I hadn't realized I was starving. I glanced at the clock on the cable box. 8:00 p.m. If they were coming for dinner, they would be here. No one shows up for a family dinner at 8 o'clock at night with small children. The surprise dinner I had been hallucinating wasn't coming. There would be no prime rib. There would be no leftovers brought in Tupperware by my thoughtful daughter-in-law. I looked toward the dark kitchen. It seemed miles away. If I wanted to survive the night, I had to stop feeding my heart with false hope and start feeding my body with actual food. I had to face the most pathetic reality of the night. I was going to have to make my own New Year's Eve dinner. You never realize how large your house is until you have to cross it while you're in pain. When the kids were little, this house felt like a shoebox. I was always tripping over toy trucks in the hallway or bumping into a teenager in the kitchen doorway. But at 8:15 p.m. on New Year's Eve, looking down the dark corridor toward the kitchen, my home felt like a canyon, and I had to cross it alone. I stared at my knees. They were stiff from sitting in the same position for 6 hours. The heating pad had done its job, but the moment I peeled it off my back, the cold air hit my skin like a slap. "Okay, Helen," I whispered. 1, 2, 3. On 3, I heaved myself up. A sharp, hot wire of pain shot through my hip, seizing my leg up so tight I gasped. I grabbed the arm of the recliner, my knuckles turning white, waiting for the SB. Asm to pass. I stood there, hunched over, breathing through my nose, counting the seconds until my body decided it was safe to move. It took a full minute before I could take the first step. I call it furniture surfing. You grab the back of the recliner, then you lunge for the doorframe. Then you grab the hallway table. Then the wall. You move from island to island, hoping you don't get stranded in the middle of the carpet. I made my way down the hall. My slippers shuffled against the hardwood, swish, swish, swish. It was the only sound in the world. When I reached the kitchen, I didn't turn on the big overhead lights. They were too bright, too cheerful. They were lights for a party, for a family chopping vegetables and icing cakes. I didn't deserve that light tonight. I flipped the switch for the small light over the stove. It cast a dim, yellow glow over the countertops. The granite was cold to the touch. I ran my hand over the island where I had rolled out thousands of sugar cookies, where David had done his science fair projects, where Sarah had sat crying over her first heartbreak while I made her cocoa. Now it was just a slab of cold stone, clean, empty, useless. I opened the pantry door. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the shelves. In the past, this pantry on New Year's Eve would have been raided, picked clean. There would be empty flour bags, empty sugar canisters, and half-used spices scattered everywhere because I'd been cooking for an army. But tonight, the pantry was full. There were the boxes of crackers I bought in case guests came, unopened. There was the tin of fancy butter cookies I bought for the grandkids, still sealed in plastic. There were the ingredients for the green bean casserole I never made. I looked at them and I felt foolish. I had bought all this, for who? For ghosts. I reached past the party food and grabbed a single can of chicken noodle soup. It wasn't the good kind. It wasn't the homemade stock I used to simmer for 12 hours with fresh dill and carrots. It was just a red and white can. Sodium and preservatives. Food for a sick person. Food for a lonely person. I took it to the counter and then faced the next battle, the pull tab. My fingers are twisted with arthritis. Some days are better than others, but the damp cold of this winter had settled into my joints. I hooked my index finger under the metal ring and pulled. It didn't budge. I tried again, gritting my teeth, putting all my weight into it. Pain shot up my wrist. "Come on," I hissed at the can. "Just open." It slipped. The sharp metal edge grazed my thumb, not enough to cut deep, but enough to sting. I wanted to throw the can across the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash it through the window. It wasn't about the soup. It was about the indignity of it. I used to lift 20-pound turkeys out of the oven without breaking a sweat. I used to carry toddlers on my hip while vacuuming. And now Now I was being defeated by a tin can. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and forced myself to calm down. I found a spoon, wedged it under the tab, and popped the seal. Pop! The sound echoed in the empty kitchen like a gunshot. I poured the gloopy, cold contents into a bowl and put it in the microwave. I set the timer for 2 minutes. Hum. Is there any sound more lonely than a microwave running in a silent house at night? It's a drone that drills right into your soul. It's the soundtrack of the widow. It's the anthem of the forgotten. I leaned against the counter while it cooked, taking the weight off my hip. I watched the numbers count down. 159, 158, 157. I thought about the dinners of the past. The table would have been set with the good china, the ones with the gold rim. The centerpiece would be lit candles. The room would be filled with the clinking of silverware and the sound of my husband saying grace. Beep, beep, beep. The microwave stopped. The memory vanished. I opened the door and took out the steaming bowl. It smelled like salt and metal. I didn't go to the dining room. The dining room table seats 12. Sitting there alone would have been pathetic. Instead, I sat at the small, round breakfast table in the corner of the kitchen. It's a table for two. I put the hot bowl directly on the polished wood. I used to yell at the kids for not using coasters. "You'll ruin the finish," I used to say. Tonight, I didn't care if it left a ring. I didn't care if it burned a hole straight through the wood. Who was going to see it? Who was coming to inspect the furniture? No one. I sat down, and the chair legs scraped loudly against the floor. I winced. I picked up my spoon and stirred the soup. The steam rose up and fogged my glasses. I took them off and set them on the table, rubbing my eyes. I took the first bite. It was hot. It burned my tongue, but it tasted like nothing. I ate mechanically, spoon to mouth, swallow, spoon to mouth, swallow. I wasn't eating for please. I was eating because my body was shaking, and I knew that if I passed out on the kitchen floor, no one would find me until the mailman came on January 2nd. The silence was suffocating. I needed noise. I needed anything. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen was still black. No texts, no missed calls. To distract myself, I tapped the blue icon. I opened Facebook. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for punishment. Maybe I just wanted to see what the rest of the world looked like while I was sitting here with my Campbell's soup. I started scrolling. Happy friends, fireworks, people holding champagne glasses. And then there it was. Posted 15 minutes ago by Jessica. It wasn't a photo of traffic. It wasn't a photo of a flat tire. It wasn't a plea for help because they were lost. It was a photo of a table. A long, beautiful mahogany table dressed in silver and white linens. Crystal glasses sparkled in the candlelight. And in the center, sitting on a silver platter, was a massive, perfect prime rib roast, steaming and pink in the middle. My heart stopped. I looked at the people in the background of the photo. I saw my son, David. He was laughing, holding a glass of red wine. I saw my grandkids wearing funny New Year's hats. And I saw the caption, "So grateful for Mom's cooking. Best New Year ever with the fam. Blessed family first." I read it again. Mom's cooking. But it wasn't my cooking. That wasn't my table. That wasn't my house. The mom she was talking about was Brenda, her mother, my son's mother-in-law. I looked down at my soup bowl. They weren't stuck in traffic. They weren't planning a surprise. They were sitting at a table belonging to another woman. a woman who hadn't raised them, a woman who hadn't nursed them through fevers, a woman who hadn't paid for David's medical school. I pushed the bowl away. I wasn't hungry anymore. I stared at the photo of that other mother's table, glowing with warmth and laughter. And the realization hit me harder than the silence. It hit me harder than the flu. I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been replaced. I stared at that hashtag, family first. It sat there on the screen, glowing in white letters, mocking me. It's funny how two little words can tear you apart, isn't it? Family first. Which family? Whose family? Because looking at that picture, it was clear that I wasn't part of the definition anymore. I was the prologue. I was the backstory. But I wasn't the main character in the story of family anymore. I put the phone face down on the table next to the half-eaten soup. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't look at David's smile or the way he was leaning comfortably toward his mother-in-law, Brenda. I sat there in the dim kitchen light, and for the first time that night, the tears stopped. The sadness dried up, and something hot and heavy took its place. We need to talk about the in-law truth. It's the thing no one wants to say out loud at church or bridge club. We all sit around smiling, showing pictures of our grandkids, saying how blessed we are. But if you look closely at our eyes, you see the truth. You see the fear. The fear that we have been replaced. You see, when you raise a son, you are raising him to leave you. That is the job description. You raise him to be a strong, independent man who can go out and find a wife and build a life. And if you do a good job, if you raise him to be a good husband, he learns that his wife comes first. Happy wife, happy life, right? I taught David that. I taught him to honor his partner. But I never realized that honoring his partner would mean erasing his mother. I thought about Brenda, the woman in the picture, the mom who cooked the roast. Brenda is 5 years younger than me. She dyes her hair a blonde that hides every single gray, and she has the kind of knees that still let her ski in Aspen during the holidays. She is vibrant. She is active. She is fun. And me, I'm the one with the walker in the trunk. I'm the one who needs help getting up from the sofa. It's a subtle war, this thing between mothers and mothers-in-law. It's not fought with guns or knives. It's fought with holiday schedules. It's fought with Sunday dinners. It's fought with who gets the real Christmas and who gets the pity visit on December 26th. For the first 10 years of David's marriage, I fought hard. I accepted the challenge. I cooked better. I bought bigger gifts. I hosted more elaborate parties. I tried to be the useful grandma. But looking at that picture, I realized the war was over. I had lost. And do you know why? Because I am the mother of the husband. And in modern families, the social calendar is controlled by the wife. Jessica, David's wife, is a fine woman. She's organized. She's ambitious. But she is closer to her own mother. Of course she is. That's natural. When she wants advice on the baby's fever, she calls Brenda. When she wants to complain about her husband, she calls Brenda. When she wants to relax on a holiday, she wants to be in the house she grew up in, smelling the food she loves. And David, my David, he just goes where he's told. He goes where the peace is. He goes where he doesn't have to fight. I looked around my kitchen again. The kitchen that I paid for. The house that my husband and I worked 40 years to pay off. I thought about the checks I had written over the years. I paid for David's orthodontist bills, 3 years of braces, so he could have that perfect smile he was flashing in the photo. I co-signed the loan for his first car so he could drive to his internships. I paid for the down payment on their first house, the starter home they sold for a profit 3 years later. I invested everything I had, my money, my youth, my energy, my sleep, into making him the man he is today. And now that he is a finished product, now that he is successful and charming and a good father, Brenda gets to enjoy him. She gets the prime years. She gets the holidays. She gets the laughter and the wine and the compliments on Facebook. And what do I get? I get the flu. I get the silence. I get a thumbs up emoji 3 days late. I felt a flash of anger, so sharp, it made my hands shake. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a feeling of being used. I felt like a contractor who had built a magnificent mansion, brick by brick, sweating in the sun for decades. And the moment the last coat of paint was dry, the owners took the keys, locked the door in my face, and invited new people in for the housewarming party. Am I just a utility to them? I asked the empty room. The question hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I started to wonder if they ever really loved me, Helen, the person, the woman who likes jazz music and reads mystery novels. Or did they just love what I did for them? Did they love the laundry service? Did they love the catering? Did they love the free babysitting? Did they love the ATM? Because now that the ATM is empty and the catering is closed and the babysitter has a bad hip, the love seems to have evaporated. It's a terrible thing to think about your own children. It makes you feel like a monster. But sitting there, with the taste of metallic chicken soup in my mouth, I couldn't stop the thought. I looked at the phone again. I wanted to pick it up. I wanted to comment on that photo. I imagined typing, "Looks delicious. I'm eating soup alone in the dark. Happy New Year, David." I imagined the chaos that would cause, the guilt, the frantic phone calls. "Mom, oh my God, we didn't know. Mom, don't be like that." But I didn't touch it. Because guilt isn't love. If I have to guilt you into remembering me, then I don't want you here. I have too much dignity for that. Even in my bathrobe, even with soup stains on the table, I have my dignity. But dignity doesn't keep you warm. I stood up from the table. The anger was fading now, replaced by a deep, exhausting, hollow feeling. The adrenaline of the rage had burned off, leaving me feeling even older than before. I picked up the bowl and walked to the sink. I turned on the faucet and watched the water rinse away the leftover noodles. I watched the cold, gray soup vanish. It didn't put up a fight. Neither did I. I turned off the light in the kitchen. I couldn't bear to look at the family first post anymore. I couldn't bear to think about Brenda and her prime rib. I began the slow, painful journey back to the living room. Furniture surfing again. Counter to doorway, doorway to wall, wall to hallway table. As I moved down the dark hallway, back toward my recliner and the glowing TV, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was getting late. The dinner hour was over. The time for texts and calls had passed. And as I approached the living room window, I saw something that made my heart stop. A light, a bright, sweeping beam of light cut across the darkness of my front lawn. It flashed against the living room wall, illuminating the family photos for a split second before vanishing. Headlights. A car was slowing down, right in front of my house. The anger vanished, the in-law truth vanished, the logic vanished. All that was left was that stupid, treacherous hope. "They came," I gasped, clutching the hallway table. "They saw the message. They felt bad. They left the party early to come to me." My heart hammered against my ribs, hard and fast. I forgot about the pain in my hip. I forgot about the resentment. I just wanted to see them. I pushed myself off the wall and shuffled as fast as my crippled legs would carry me toward the front window. I moved faster than I had in years. I don't know how I did it. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was that desperate, pathetic instinct that lives inside every mother, the instinct that says, "My child is here, so I must be ready." I forgot about the bad hip. I forgot about the flu. I forgot about the anger I had just felt in the kitchen. All those nasty thoughts I had about being replaced. All that bitterness about the prime rib and the in-laws. I shoved it all into a box and kicked it under the mental bed. "See, Helen," I scolded myself as I shuffled rapidly toward the front door, my hand clutching the collar of my bathrobe. "You were wrong. You're a cynical old woman. They didn't forget. They were just late." My mind started spinning a new narrative instantly. They must have seen my text. They must have felt terrible. They probably left the party early, packed up some leftovers, and drove straight here. David is probably feeling guilty right now. I bet Sarah is in the car, too. I reached the entryway. My heart was doing flip-flops in my chest, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I paused at the hall mirror. It was dark, but I could see my silhouette. I quickly smoothed down my hair. I wiped the corner of my mouth to make sure there was no soup residue. I tightened the belt of my robe. I didn't want them to see me looking like a victim. I wanted to look like Mom, dignified, happy to see them. "Okay," I whispered, "okay." I reached for the heavy curtain that covers the bay window next to the front door. My hand was shaking. I pulled the fabric back just an inch. Outside, the world was dark and cold. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the snow. But there it was, a car. It was sitting right at the end of my driveway. The headlights were blindingly bright, cutting through the winter gloom. I squinted. It was a dark sedan. It looked a bit like David's car, or maybe Michael's. It was hard to tell with the glare. But it was stopped. It was definitely stopped. I watched, holding my breath. "Come on," I urged them mentally. "Put it in park, come up the walk." The driver's side door opened. My heart soared. This was it. The door was opening. A figure stepped out. I leaned closer to the cold glass, fogging it up with my breath. I wiped it away frantically. The figure stepped into the pool of light from the street lamp. It was David. It was Michael. It wasn't any of my children. It was a young man I had never seen before in my life. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and holding a square, insulated bag. I froze. He didn't look toward my house. He didn't look toward my front porch light, which I had forgotten to turn on. He turned his back to me and started walking across the street, toward the Miller's house. I watched, paralyzed, as he walked up the Miller's driveway. The door swung open before he even knocked. I saw the Millers standing there. The husband was standing behind his wife, holding their toddler in his arms. The golden light from their foyer spilled out onto the snow, framing them like a halo. They were laughing. They took the food. The husband kissed the baby's head. They were a perfect little Norman Rockwell painting, glowing in the warmth of their home. A picture of everything I used to have. Everything I thought I had built. It didn't just hurt to watch them. It burned. It was a delivery driver. Just a delivery driver dropping off a feast for a happy, young family that actually wanted to be together. I stood there, gripping the curtain fabric so hard my fingers cramped. I watched the boy jog back to his car, the car that I had convinced myself belonged to my son. He got in, he put the car in reverse, and then he did the thing that broke me. He didn't just back out. He pulled forward into my driveway to turn around. His headlights swept across my living room wall one last time, a bright, blinding flash that illuminated the wall of fame, lighting up David's diploma and Sarah's wedding photo for a split second before swinging away into the darkness. He used my driveway as a U-turn. He drove away. The red taillights got smaller and smaller until they disappeared around the corner. And then the street was empty again. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood there by the window for a long time. The adrenaline that had carried me to the window suddenly evaporated. And when it left, it took everything else with it. The pain rushed back into my body with a vengeance. My hips screamed. My knees buckled. I felt the fever burning behind my eyes. But worse than the physical pain was the feeling of absolute foolishness. I felt like a child who had been tricked. I felt like a dog waiting by the door for a master who moved away years ago. "You old fool," I whispered to the glass. "Look at you, peeking through the blinds like a neighborhood busybody, fixing your hair for a delivery boy." A deep, shuddering sob tried to climb up my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't cry standing up. I didn't have the energy. I let go of the curtain. It fell back into place, sealing the tomb once more. I turned around to face the dark hallway. Now I had to make the walk back. The walk to the window had been fueled by hope. The walk back was fueled by nothing but gravity. I shuffled back toward the living room. Swish, swish. The sound of my slippers was the saddest sound in the world. I made it back to the wreckle, inert, and collapsed into it. The leather groaned under my weight. I reached for the heating pad, but it had gone cold again. I didn't have the strength to plug it back in. I just pulled the Afghan up to my chin and stared at the television. The show had changed. The countdown specials were ramping up. The hosts were shouting about how there were only 2 hours left until midnight. I looked at the clock on the cable box. 10:15 p.m. The logical part of my brain, the part that had been making excuses, the part that had been building timelines and traffic scenarios, finally shut down. The defense attorney packed up his briefcase and left the building. There were no more excuses to make. It wasn't traffic. It wasn't a surprise. I looked at the phone one last time. It was sitting exactly where I had left it. Silent, dark. I picked it up, but I didn't turn the screen on. I just held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it. It felt like a brick. I finally let the truth in. "They aren't coming," I said out loud. "No one is coming." I sank deeper into the chair. The hope was gone. But the clock kept ticking. 10:20 p.m. My stomach gave a small, painful twist. Not hunger exactly, but emptiness. I looked toward the dark kitchen one last time. And then I remembered what was sitting on the bottom shelf of the refrigerator. A small white box. I had bought it yesterday at the grocery store. A small vanilla cake, just a 6-inch round, with Happy New Year written in blue gel icing. I had bought it thinking, just in case. Just in case someone drops by, you can't have a party without cake. Well, there was no party. There were no guests. I stared at the kitchen doorway. I could leave it there. I could let it rot. I could go to sleep and forget this wretched day ever happened. But then a spark of something stubborn flared up in my chest. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was just the refusal to be completely defeated. "No," I whispered. I paid $12 for that cake. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my robe. I'll be damned if I let that cake go to waste. If I was going to be alone, and if I was going to be miserable, I was at least going to have dessert. I made the trip back to the kitchen one last time. My legs felt like lead. The fever was humming in my ears, a low static buzz that made everything feel slightly unreal. I opened the refrigerator door, and the light momentarily blinded me. There it was, bottom shelf, next to a carton of half-empty milk and a jar of pickles. The box was white cardboard with a clear plastic window on top. I reached in and pulled it out. It was cold and light, too light. I looked at it through the plastic. It was a vanilla sponge cake, the kind they mass-produce at the grocery store bakery. It had white frosting that looked a little too stiff, like shaving cream, and bright blue gel icing scrawled across the top in shaky cursive. Happy New Year 2025. I had bought it yesterday morning. I remember standing in the bakery aisle, debating between this one and a chocolate one. I remember thinking, well, David loves vanilla. If David comes by, he'll want vanilla. I let out a short, dry laugh that sounded more like a cough. David loves vanilla, I whispered to the humming fridge. Or he used to. I felt a sudden, nasty twist in my gut. Does he still love vanilla? Or has Brenda convinced him that vanilla is boring? Maybe at Brenda's house they eat red velvet. Maybe they eat tiramisu. Maybe he looks at vanilla cake now and thinks, that's old-fashioned, that's plain, that's mom. I grabbed a knife from the drawer, the silver cake knife with the pearl handle that I usually save for birthdays, and a single paper napkin. I didn't bother with a plate. I didn't want to make another dish to wash. I carried the box back to the living room like it was something fragile. I set it down on the coffee table, right in front of my recliner. Then I sat down to wait for the end of the year. The television was getting louder. Or maybe the room was just getting quieter. The hosts on the screen were frantic now, their smiles stretched wide, their voices shrill with excitement. They were cutting to shots of the crowd in Times Square, thousands of people jumping up and down, wearing goofy 2025 glasses, blowing horns, kissing each other. 11:45 p.m. I watched a young girl on the screen get interviewed. She had glitter on her cheeks. "Who are you here with?" the reporter asked. "My best friends," she screamed. "We drove 6 hours to be here. We wouldn't miss it." I felt a pang in my chest, so sharp I had to rub my sternum. "Must be nice," I whispered, "to be worth the drive." I sat there, staring at the blue gel icing on the cake. I started to think about the cakes of the past. My New Year's Eve cakes were famous in our family. I didn't buy them from a store. Good Lord, no. I made a 3-layer coconut cream cake from scratch. I would spend hours grating fresh coconut. I would whip the meringue until my arm ached. Wait, and I brought that cake out at midnight. The whole room would cheer. "Here comes Grandma's cake," the kids would yell. My husband would wink at me and say, "Sweetest thing in the room," next to the cook. I looked at the cardboard box in front of me. It looked so pathetic. It looked so cheap. It looked exactly like what my life had become, artificial, cold, and store-bought. 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes left. The energy on the TV was reaching a fever pitch. The ball was getting ready to drop. The music was swelling. I picked up the knife. My hand was trembling. At first, it was just a little shake, the kind I get when I'm tired. But then it got worse. My fingers wouldn't listen to me. The silver knife rattled against the side of the cardboard box. Tap, tap, tap. Stop it, I commanded my hand. Just cut the slice. I tried to line up the blade over the blue icing. 11:58 p.m. The crowd on TV started to chant. 2 minutes, 2 minutes. I pressed the knife down into the frosting. It resisted. The frosting had formed a hard, sugary crust from sitting in the grocery store case too long. When I pressed the knife down, the surface didn't slice cleanly. It cracked. The Happy New Year script shattered into jagged blue flakes. It looked ugly. It looked ruined, just like the night. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just cutting a cake. I was cutting ties. I was sitting here, alone in the dark, performing a ritual that was meant for a family. I was acting out a pantomime of celebration when there was absolutely nothing to celebrate. The realization washed over me like a tidal wave of black water. I wasn't just lonely, I was obsolete. I was like an old appliance that no longer worked. I had served my purpose. I had raised the children, I had kept the home, I had baked the cakes. And now that the job was done, I had been put out on the curb for trash pickup. The tears came then, not the angry tears I had felt in the kitchen, not the frustration tears of the stuck and lid. These were the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of grief. I dropped the knife. It clattered onto the coffee table, smearing white frosting on the wood. 11:59 p.m. 10, the TV screamed. 9. I put my hands over my face. My skin was wet. My shoulders shook so hard I thought my ribs might crack. 8:7. I miss them, I choked out, my voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. Oh God, I miss them so much. It wasn't that I missed the party. I missed mattering. I missed being the person they looked for when the clock struck 12. I missed being the first person they wanted to hug. 6:54. I curled forward, burying my face in my knees, rocking back and forth like a wounded animal. The pain was unbearable. It felt like my heart was being physically ripped out of my chest. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. The TV exploded with noise. Fireworks popped. Drums banged. A million people screamed in unison. Auld Lang Syne started playing, that slow, mournful tune that breaks your heart even when you're happy. And in the middle of all that noise, I howled. I cried out into the empty room, a sound of pure desolation. Happy New Year, I sobbed into my hands. Happy New Year, Helen, you're all alone. You're all alone and nobody cares. I felt completely worthless. I felt like dust. I felt like if I disappeared right now, if I just evaporated into the air, it would take days for anyone to even notice. The cake would sit there and rot. The soup would dry up in the bowl. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my palms into my sockets until I saw sparks. Please, I whispered to God or the universe or whoever was listening. Just let me go to sleep. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be this person anymore. I stayed like that for a long time. The cheering on the TV faded into background noise. The music changed to something upbeat, but I didn't move. I just sat there, broken, with frosting on my coffee table and a heart full of ashes. I was at the bottom, the absolute bottom of the well. It was 5 minutes past midnight, and I knew with terrifying certainty that this was the rest of my life. Just me, the silence, and the memory of when I used to be loved. And then, knock, knock, knock. My head snapped up. The sound was sharp, loud, deliberate. It cut through the noise of the television like a gunshot. I froze, my hands still hovering near my face, my breath catching in a wet hiccup. I stared at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. My blood ran cold. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a jolt of pure adrenaline. It was 12:05 a.m. In my neighborhood, a knock at this hour only means two things: bad people looking for an easy target, or the police looking for a next of kin. My mind flashed to David. Had he been in a wreck? Was the silence today because they were in a hospital? Had something terrible happened on the icy roads? Or was it something worse? Was it someone who saw a dark house and an old woman living alone? I gripped T, the arms of the recliner, my fingernails digging into the leather. I was defenseless. I was weak. My hip wouldn't let me run. My voice was too hoarse to scream. And someone was standing on the other side of that wood. I didn't answer it, not at first. I sat frozen in my recliner, staring at the heavy oak door as if it were a bomb about to go off. Knock, knock, knock. It came again, louder this time, more insistent. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the clock. 12:06 a.m. My mind was racing through the worst-case scenarios, spinning a web of horror in seconds. It's the police, I thought, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. David spun off the road. The icy patch on the highway, the text I sent. It was the last thing he saw before the car flipped. I could see it. I could see the flashing lights in my mind. I could see the officer taking off his hat, looking solemn. Or a darker voice whispered, "It's not the police. It's someone who knows you're alone." I wanted to hide. I wanted to turn off the lamp and curl into a ball. But I'm a mother. And if that was an officer standing on my porch with news about my son, I couldn't hide. I had to know. I took a deep, shaky breath. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I pushed myself up from the chair. The pain in my hip was blinding. My muscles had seized up from the cold and the stress, but I ignored it. Fear is a powerful anesthetic. I grabbed my cane from where it was leaning against the table. My hand was shaking so badly, the rubber tip clattered against the floor. Clack. The noise echoed in the silent room. "Who is it?" I called out. My voice was thin, reedy. It didn't sound like a brave homeowner. It sounded like exactly what I was, a frightened old woman. There was a pause. Then a voice muffled by the thick wood. "Helen, open the damn door. It's freezing out here." I stopped dead in my tracks. I knew that voice. It wasn't a police officer. It wasn't a robber. It was a voice sandpapered by 50 years of cigarettes and unsolicited advice. I lowered the cane. The terror in my chest instantly evaporated, but in its place came a physical crash so hard it almost floored me. My knees, which had been locked tight with fear, suddenly turned to water. I actually had to grab the doorframe to keep from sliding down to the rug. The adrenaline drained out of me, leaving me shaking like a leaf. I shuffled to the door as fast as I could. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were stiff and the lock was cold. Click. I pulled the door open. A blast of icy wind hit me in the face, stinging my wet cheeks. Standing on my porch, bundled up in a puffy down coat that looked 2 sizes too big, was Martha. Martha, my best friend since the 3rd grade. She looked like a wreck. Her gray hair was sticking out from under a lopsided knit hat. Her nose was bright red from the cold. She was clutching a brown paper bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She didn't smile. She didn't scream, "Happy New Year." She didn't blow a noisemaker. She just stood there, shivering on my welcome mat, looking at me. And I knew what she saw. She saw the bathrobe. She saw the disheveled hair. But mostly, she saw my eyes. She saw the red, swollen evidence of the breakdown I had just had. She saw the grief written all over my face like a map. I stood there speechless. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Martha didn't wait for an invitation. She never does. She stepped inside and kicked the door shut behind her with her heel, cutting off the cold wind. "Jesus, Helen," she grumbled, stomping the snow off her boots onto my rug. "You need to fix that doorbell. I've been knocking for 5 minutes. I thought you defallen in the tub." I felt a flash of panic. Wait, is that why the kids didn't come? Because the bell is broken. But then reality corrected me. The doorbell broke in '99. We never fixed it because everyone who mattered knew to just walk in. My kids have keys. Or, at least they used to. No, the broken doorbell wasn't the reason. Martha put the bottle of wine on the hallway table, right next to the phone that hadn't rung all night. Then she turned to look at me properly. The grumbling stopped. Her face softened. The toughness in her eyes melted away, revealing a deep, sad kindness that I hadn't seen from anyone in months. "Oh, honey," she said softly. That was all it took. The wall I had been trying to rebuild, the dignity, the toughness, it all crumbled. "They didn't come," I whispered. The words just fell out of me. "Martha, they didn't come, none of them." Martha didn't ask who. She didn't ask why. She didn't say, "Maybe they got stuck in traffic." She didn't try to be a defense attorney for my children. She just dropped the paper bag on the floor and stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around me. Her coat was cold and smelled like winter air and menthol cigarettes, but her hug was the warmest thing I had felt in a year. I collapsed into her. I buried my face in her puffy shoulder and let out a sob, not the terrifying howl from earlier, but a quiet, relieved cry. I held onto her like she was a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "I know," she murmured into my hair, rubbing my back with her gloved hand. "I know, sweetie, I know." She held me up, literally. My legs were giving out, my hip was screaming, but she took my weight. We stood there in the entryway, two 70-year-old women holding each other up, while the muffled sounds of the TV celebration continued in the other room. After a minute, she pulled back and looked at me. She reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek with her thumb. Her skin was rough, calloused from years of gardening. "You look like hell, Helen," she said, a small, crooked smile appearing on her face. I let out a wet, shaky laugh. "You don't look so great yourself." "Yeah, well," she sniffed, reaching down to pick up the paper bag. I was sitting at home watching that ball drop, and I looked at my cat, and I said, "Mittens, if I see one more happy couple kissing in Times Square, I'm going to punch you into next week." She paused, adjusting her hat. "Okay, I didn't say that to the cat, but I thought it." She looked me right in the eye. My kids didn't call either, Helen. The admission hung in the air between us. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the same pain in her eyes that was in mine. I saw the same loneliness. Martha has 3 kids, 2 in Florida, 1 in Texas. She talks about them all the time. She brags about their promotions. But standing here at 12:10 a.m., the truth was out. We were both orphans of our own making. "I tried to go to bed," Martha continued, her voice thick. "But I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about you sitting in this big old house, and I thought misery loves company, and I have wine." She held up the bottle. It was a Pinot Grigio with a screw top. I got it at the gas station on the way over, she said. It was $6. It probably tastes like lighter fluid, but it's got alcohol in it. And she added, shaking the paper bag, I have stale pretzels. I looked at her standing there in my hallway, and I felt something shift in my chest. The ice around my heart cracked, but this time it wasn't painful. It was like the spring thaw. I wasn't alone. Someone had crossed the icy roads for me. Someone had left their warm house for me. Not because they had to, not because of obligation or DNA or an inheritance. She came because she knew I was hurting. She came because she was my friend. I wiped my face with my sleeve, feeling a sudden surge of gratitude, so strong it almost knocked me over again. I don't have pretzels, I said, my voice trembling but steadying. But I have a cake. Martha's eyebrows shot up. A cake, what kind? Store-bought vanilla, I said, and I already smashed the icing because I was crying over it. Martha laughed, a real, loud, barking laugh that echoed through the house and chased the shadows away. Smashed store-bought cake, she said, grabbing my arm to help me turn around. That's my favorite flavor. Let's go eat the whole damn thing. She guided me back toward the living room. And for the first time all night, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a place where two survivors were about to have a feast. There is a specific kind of magic that happens when a best friend walks into a room. It's not the sparkly kind of magic you see in Disney movies. It's a practical, gritty kind of magic. It changes the air pressure. 5 minutes ago, my living room was a waiting room for death. It was cold, dark, and filled with the ghosts of my disappointment. But as Martha bustled in, kicking off her boots and throwing her heavy coat over the back of my armchair, the ghosts scattered. Jesus, Helen, she muttered, rubbing her hands together to warm them up. Do you pay for heat by the minute? It's an icebox in here. I watched her from the hallway, leaning on my cane. A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in 12 hours. I had the heat on, I said, my voice still raspy from the crying. I think I just felt cold because, well, you know. Yeah, Martha waved a hand dismissively, refusing to let me wallow. Well, we're warming it up now. Where are the glasses? And don't tell me to use the crystal. I'm not washing delicate china at 1 in the morning. I pointed to the kitchen. Top shelf, the mugs. She marched into the kitchen. I heard the cupboard open, then the sound of the gas station wine being unscrewed. Crack fizz. I made my way to the sofa and sat down, not the recliner. The recliner was for waiting. The sofa was for visiting. Martha came back with 2 coffee mugs filled to the brim with pale yellow liquid. She set one down in front of me and flopped onto the cushion beside me. Then she looked at the coffee table. She looked at the smashed cake. The Happy New Year script was obliterated. Tea. The knife was still lying there, sticky with white frosting. It looked like a crime scene. Martha leaned forward and inspected it like a detective. Well, she said, picking up the knife and licking a glob of icing off the blade. You really did a number on this thing, didn't you? I was angry, I admitted, looking down at my hands. And sad it felt, symbolic. Martha snorted. Symbolic. Helen, it's a $5 sponge cake. The only thing it symbolizes is high fructose corn syrup. She cut a massive, messy slice, mostly corner, mostly frosting, and plopped it onto the paper napkin I had left there. She didn't ask for a fork. She just broke off a piece with her fingers and popped it into her mouth. "Mum," she groaned, closing her eyes. "Tastes like chemicals and preservatives. Delicious." She broke off another piece and held it out to me. "Eat," she commanded. "You look like you're about to faint, and don't tell me you're not hungry." I took the piece of cake. It was smashed. It was sticky. But when I put it in my mouth, the sugar hit my tongue and my brain practically vibrated with relief. I hadn't realized how empty I was. We sat there for a while in silence, just eating the ruined cake with our hands and drinking the cheap wine out of world's best grandma mugs. The wine was terrible. It was sour and sharp, just like Martha said. But as it went down, it warmed a path straight to my stomach. "You know," Martha said after her second glass, staring at the muted TV screen where the crowds were slowly dispersing. "I almost texted Jason tonight. Jason is her oldest, the golden boy. I had it typed out," she continued, swirling the wine in her mug. "I was going to say, thanks for the call, hope you're having fun. You know, real passive-aggressive, the kind that makes them feel like dirt." I nodded. I thought about commenting on David's Facebook photo. He was eating prime rib. Martha let out a low whistle. "Ouch, prime rib, that stings." "Brenda made it," I added. "Of course she did. That woman tries too hard." Martha rolled her eyes. "So, did you do it? Did you leave the comment?" "No," I said. "I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Or maybe I didn't want to know for sure that they saw it and didn't care." Martha clinked her mug against mine. A dull thud of ceramic on ceramic. "To dignity," she said. "It's a cold blanket, but it's the only one we've got left." We drank. "Why do we do it, Martha?" I asked, the alcohol loosening the knot in my chest. "We gave them everything. I remember when David had the chicken pox. I stayed up for 3 nights straight holding his hands so he wouldn't scratch. I remember when Sarah got her heart broken by that football player. I drove her around for hours just letting her cry." I looked at the photos on the wall, the illuminated faces of the children who weren't here. "We raised them to leave," Martha said, her voice dropping an octave. "That's the cruel joke of motherhood, Helen. If you do your job right, they don't need you anymore. We made them strong. We made them independent. And now they're so independent they forgot who built the foundation." She leaned her head back against the sofa cushions and sighed. "We're the launch pad," she murmured. "The rocket goes up, it touches the stars, everyone cheers. But nobody looks back at the burnt-up launch pad on the ground." I looked at Martha. Her eyes were closed. The lines on her face were deep in the dim light. I realized then that she was just as hurt as I was. She put on a tough act, the swearing, the lighter fluid wine, but she was bleeding just the same. And yet she was here. That was the difference. My children who share my DNA, who I carried in my body. They were miles away, warm and happy, oblivious to my pain. But Martha, who owes me nothing. Martha, who I met on a playground in 1965 because we both had the same ugly red sneakers. Martha, who isn't related to me by blood or marriage. She was the one sitting in the dark with me. There's an old saying, blood is thicker than water. People use it to mean family comes first. But the full quote is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds you choose are stronger than the bonds you are born into. I looked at the smashed cake, the cheap wine, and my best friend's tired face. "I'm glad you came," I whispered. "I really am, I was in a bad place, Martha." Martha opened one eye. "I know you were," she said softly. "I saw the curtains moving. I knew you were waiting by the window." I felt a blush creep up my neck. "You saw that. Honey, I've known you for 60 years. You think I don't know your sad window peeking routine? She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong. I wasn't going to let you do it alone. We're the Thelma and Louise of being forgotten old ladies. We go off the cliff together. I laughed, a real laugh this time. It bubbled up from my chest, surprising me. Thelma and Louise drove off a cliff, I reminded her. Yeah, well, Martha grinned, reaching for the last piece of cake. At least they went out driving a convertible instead of waiting by the phone. We sat there for another hour. We finished the wine. We finished the cake. We talked about our aches and pains. We talked about how our knees predict the weather better than the weatherman. We laughed about the time in high school when we tried to dye our hair and turned it green. And slowly, imperceptibly, the coldness left my bones. The fever in my head seemed to break, replaced by the warm buzz of alcohol and companionship. The silence of the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was just peaceful. Around 1:30 a.m., Martha yawned, a jaw-cracking sound. I can't drive home, she announced. I've had 2 mugs of this poison. I'm claiming the guest room. It's yours, I said. She stood up, groaning as her knees popped. She grabbed the empty wine bottle by the neck and the bag of unopened pretzels. I'm taking these as a nightcap, she said. And if you wake me up before noon, I'll hit you with your own cane. Deal, I said. She shuffled toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back to me. Helen, yes. Happy New Year. She didn't say it like the people on TV. She said it like a promise. Happy New Year, Martha, I said. She disappeared down the hall. A moment later, I heard the guest room door click shut. I sat alone in the living room for one last moment. The mess was still there, the wine stains, the crumbs, but it didn't look sad anymore. It looked like a party had happened here. A small, strange, broken party, but a party nonetheless. I turned off the lamp. For the first time all day, I wasn't looking at my phone. I wasn't waiting for it to light up. I wasn't checking the time. I pulled myself up, leaning heavily on my cane. The pain was still there, but it was bearable. I walked down the hallway, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of Martha snoring in the guest room. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard all year. My children had forgotten me. That was the truth. It was a jagged, ugly pill to swallow. But as I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, I realized something else. I hadn't been saved by the people I raised. I had been saved by the person I chose. And tonight, that was enough. I woke up to the sun hitting my face. It wasn't that gray, miserable winter light from yesterday. It was a bright, sharp January sun, the kind that reflects off the snow and makes you squint. For a second, just a split second, I forgot. I lay there under my quilt, feeling the warmth on my cheek, and I felt normal. Then the headache hit me, a dull, thumping rhythm right behind my eyes. I groaned and rolled over, pressing my hand to my forehead. I smiled. That was the gas station Pinot Grigio. Martha was right, it was poison. But lying there, nursing a hangover at 70 years old, I felt strangely alive. I pushed the covers back. My hip was stiff. It always is in the morning, but it didn't feel as heavy as it did last night. The fever in my chest had broken, leaving behind just a little tickle in my throat. I sat up and listened. From down the hall, I could hear the rhythmic, chainsaw snoring of my best friend. It was loud enough to rattle the windows. I chuckled. "Sleep tight, you old bat," I whispered affectionately. I put on my slippers and made my way to the kitchen. The scene of the crime. The empty soup bowl was still there. The smashed cake box was on the coffee table in the living room. The wine stains were on the coasters. But in the daylight, it didn't look tragic. It just looked like the aftermath of a long night. I started the coffee pot. The smell of brewing coffee, rich and dark, filled the kitchen, chasing away the smell of the old soup. I stood by the window while it brewed, looking out at the driveway. The snow was pristine and white. The tire tracks from the delivery driver, the U-turn that had broken my heart last night, were still there, frozen in the ice. But they didn't hurt me to look at anymore. They were just tracks. And then it happened. Bzzz. My phone, sitting on the counter where I had abandoned it last night, vibrated against the granite. I stared at it. Yesterday, that sound would have made my heart stop. Yesterday, I would have lunged for it, desperate for a crumb of attention. Today, I just watched it buzz. I waited for the coffee to finish dripping. I poured myself a mug, adding a splash of cream. I took a sip. Only then did I pick up the phone. It was a text from Sarah. 10:15 a.m. Happy New Year, Mom. So sorry I didn't call yesterday. It was absolute chaos with the boys. Hope you're feeling better. Love you. I read the words. I looked at the emojis, the party popper, the red heart. And I felt nothing. No anger, no tears, no surge of joy. It was just text on a screen. I realized then that the umbilical cord had finally been cut. Not by her, but by me. For 40 years, my happiness had been tethered to them. If they were happy, I was happy. If they called, I was worthy. If they needed me, I had a purpose. But reading that breezy, guilt-free apology, I realized that I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't be a beggar at the table of my own children. I didn't type back immediately. I didn't type, "It's okay, honey, I understand." I just put the phone down. I'd reply later. Maybe after lunch, maybe tomorrow. I had a guest to attend to. I had a friend sleeping in the other room who actually showed up. I took my coffee into the living room and sat in the sunlight. And since we've come to the end of this story, I want to say something to you. Yes, you, the woman listening to this. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet house right now. Maybe you're looking at a phone that doesn't ring enough. Maybe you're feeling that ache in your chest, that fear that you are slowly becoming invisible. I want you to listen to me closely. Stop chasing them. We spend our 20s and 30s exhausted, running after toddlers. We spend our 40s and 50s worrying about teenagers. We spend our lives pouring everything we have into these vessels, our time, our money, our love, our sanity. And we expect that, one day, the vessel will pour something back. But children aren't retirement plans. They aren't emotional insurance policies. They are people. And people are selfish. They are busy building their own worlds, just like we built ours. It hurts. God, I know it hurts. It feels like a betrayal of the contract we thought we signed when we gave birth to them. But here is the hard truth I learned on New Year's Eve. You cannot make someone love you the way you want to be loved. You can only decide what you will accept. I decided last night that I am done accepting crumbs. I am done being the backup plan for the holidays. I am done being the useful grandma who only gets a call when a babysitter is needed. I am reclaiming my dignity. And here is my advice to you. Find your Marthas. Look around your life. Who are the people who show up when it's inconvenient? Who are the people who will drink cheap wine with you at midnight? Who are the people who will eat smashed cake and tell you that you look like hell? Cherish them water those gardens. Because while blood might be thick, friendship is solid ground. And when you're 70 years old and the world feels shaky, you don't need thick liquid. You need ground to stand on. I looked up. Martha was standing there, squinting in the bright light. She was wearing my old flannel bathrobe, which was too short for her, and her hair was sticking up in every direction like a mad scientist. She looked terrible. She looked beautiful. "Is that coffee?" she croaked, her voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "It is," I said, lifting my mug. "Thank God," she grumbled, shuffling into the room. "My head feels like someone took a hammer to it. Why did you let me drink that swill?" "Because we're Thelma and Louise," I said, "and we go off the cliff together." Martha snorted, dropping onto the sofa next to me. "Next time, let's pick a cliff with better booze." She leaned her head on my shoulder. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I looked out the window at the bright, cold January morning. The year stretched out in front of me. It would have challenges. My hip would still hurt. The house would still be quiet sometimes. My children might call or they might not. But as I sat there, smelling the coffee and feeling the weight of my best friend's head on my shoulder, I knew I was going to be okay. I wasn't the matriarch anymore. I wasn't the glue. I wasn't the event planner. I looked at Martha, snoring lightly on my shoulder. My kids didn't save me. I didn't save myself. She saved me. I was just Helen. And thanks to the woman sleeping next to me, Helen was finally enough.